Welcome to episode 44.
Hey, another episode of the High Tech Podcast. Another week. We are back. Still here, still talking,
Still alive.
still same place.
Everyone made it into 2022. We've made it this far into 2022.
2022. Some of us crawled in. Some of us
We're
are
dragged
still
in by
not
others.
quite sure what year it is. Some of us are still writing 2021. You know who you are, and it's me too, so it's okay. Anyway, welcome back. Another episode this week, guys. Super excited about this episode. As we've mentioned a couple times now, jumping into season 2. As if you didn't know we were in another season, because Will and I never mention it. And we're in a season 2. We've talked about this. We're bringing people in, guests, into the actual weekly episodes.
Yes.
So if you've been following the High Tech Podcast for a little while, first of all, congrats on sticking with us.
Thank you. We appreciate you.
So yeah, thank you for sticking with us through some of the dark ages. But you know that we've done a lot of, we did an interview series during season 1, but we didn't really include those in the actual season. And Will and I realized that we were making more work for ourselves.
Yeah.
And that was
Definitely.
dumb. And we were kind of holding ourselves, I think, pigeonholing ourselves a little bit. So, we're bringing more people in. And this week we've got a great guest, Chris Morris, who's a good friend of ours and a VR wizard, as you will find out later in this episode. But we got a chance to have Chris on, and I'm super excited about that and what we get to talk about with him. Before we jump in, just a quick reminder, High Tech Podcast is online. We're in the interwebs. We exist.
All of the webs.
All of the webs. And so just a reminder, if you don't already, check us out on Twitter at High Tech Podcast. Make sure to subscribe and follow us there. We'd love to talk to you on Twitter. Or email us at inbox@hightechpodcast.us if you have some suggestions, ideas, fun gifs,
Memes.
thoughts, memes,
You want to tell us
recipes,
that you like
whatever you would like.
anything.
Yeah, anything. Just hit us up. We'd like to talk to you. And then if you didn't know this already, we have a website. We've had it for a while, hightechpod.us. We put resources there. All our episodes go on that website. So please check it out. It's a really cool place. And then finally, if you were bored of me saying things, don't worry, this is the last one. Anchor.fm/hightechpod. You can find basically everywhere our podcast is distributed. So,
Which is a weird one. It's a little bit of an oxymoron. It's like, hey, you're listening to us, so you're on something. But if you
you're
need
on
something else to listen to or need to share it with someone else, I think that's the most important one.
I think that's the biggest thing.
Share
or you're
it
like,
with
you listen
others.
to us on our website and you're annoyed because you listen to all your other podcasts on Google. Guess what? You don't have to be. We're there.
Exactly.
So you can go find us there. But anyway, so check us out online. Super great. With that said, I'm not going to hold us up anymore. Let's talk to Chris, the VR wizard, about the future of education. A tiny topic.
There is something to doing this whole thing that I think is both a privilege and an honor, right? Josh and I started this as friends. It's fun that we have, background knowledge and whatever. But like, as we've started the podcast, we've connected with real people in the world.
Yeah.
Weird. They're
Fake
actually
people
out
too,
there.
but real people,
A couple of fake ones.
Yeah,
But-
not just real.
Tonight, this episode, we have the extra privilege and honor of having another person who we actually know in real life, a friend. He's been in my house.
Real. We have
spent time
confirmed it.
together.
I am a real human.
He is a real human. That is the beautiful, wonderful voice of Chris Morris, a good friend of Josh and mine. Chris is a virtual reality animator. Is that? Oh, do you have a title? What's your title?
Yeah, I mean my technical title is lead 3D artist, but
Okay.
Oh,
Okay.
that sounds cooler than what Will said. So
yeah, I mean the VR part, it makes it, adds a certain level of cool to it.
It's not untrue. It is true.
yeah, it's true.
Your end product is in VR.
I just would
right?
like to
Yeah.
call you Wizard. Like, can that be your title? Just Wizard.
VR wizard.
VR
yeah.
Wizard. I feel like is a solid title.
A motion has been tabled. I second the motion. He is now the VR wizard.
There it is. Title.
I will take that title. I'll bring that to my boss and ask him to be promoted to VR wizard.
We will want that follow up. We'll put that in the show notes. Make sure that people see your Instagram handle.
Yeah.
New job title.
New hashtag. Hashtag upgrade Chris.
Just a little high tech hijinks. We are trying in 2022, right? This is a little bit of a note for the podcast's sake. We're trying to bring in not only teachers, not only other instructional designers, not only products, but students or people who have been through education, right? Everybody can be a part of making education better. And we know that Chris's experience, specifically in an art context, will be really insightful today. That's one of the really exciting parts about having him. But he works in such an amazing space. Josh and I love videos, video games, the nerd world, and Chris literally creates them. He's like our idol. But the goal today, right, is to get you introduced to Chris, get started here, and make sure that we kind of see a little bit of like what his experience was as an art student. Like we have not talked to, we know nothing. Josh and I know nothing about art and art education. I've worked on 1 or 2 art classes as an instructional designer, but this is going to be a fresh experience and a fresh perspective.
Now I'm asking this purely out of ignorance. What was your actual major going through as a student? I know you had like an art background, but what was kind of the like major courses that you were taking throughout that period?
Yeah, so it's kind of a funny thing. My major at PCAD was something called digital media. Very broad.
I was gonna say that sounds like what we do in education when we don't know what to call someone. We just give them like 2 words that sound like it involves what they do, and then expect them to do a lot of things.
Exactly. It's literally just saying I make digital things. Like
so you're a digital
that's literally
artist,
everyone
like...
today. Yeah. They've since renamed the major. That's kind of the funny part. So it is now called animation and game art.
Oh,
okay.
Can you like apply to get that bachelor's degree, you know, is that for your wall?
I wish. No, there's something cute about being part of the small group that graduated from the digital media, the digital things major.
It's a badge of honor.
Yeah.
Well, that's just a little bit of the background, the history, because I think that like knowing what you went through or what you were trying to do is helpful to paint the picture of Chris Morris and his experience as a virtual reality wizard. That's now your title in my brain. I cannot remember what you actually said.
Yeah.
But we really wanted to dig in today the future, right? Like you went through making digital media, digital things, but like what could you imagine the world would be like if virtual reality was a part of not only your education when you're trying to make it, but like Josh's education trying to be a pastor, or my education trying to be an English teacher? Like could VR be a part of the classroom?
Yeah, the same way that like laptops and iPads have kind of slipped into the classroom over the past, couple decades, I think virtual reality is kind of the next step.
Wow.
Like the only reason why it's not right now is because the hardware and just the accessibility to the platform is not quite there yet. We're slowly getting there. The level of ease of use and the amount of content that's on virtual reality, we're slowly getting to a point where it could be used in a more broad educational space. But I think that it is truly, the future of teaching people anything.
I know in my time in higher education, I didn't have one professor. I had some like come up with ideas about VR or just different approaches, like augmented reality, is a very easy thing to approach for a lot of people because you're just taking pictures or videos of the real world and putting something on it after the fact. Mm-hmm. But I didn't have anyone ever try to do anything with virtual reality. Like they just never got past like, oh, wouldn't that be cool if,
Yeah. I don't know what you're talking about. I got it all the time in my theological education. Yeah. They were all using VR left and right. No, 0. I'm not even sure half of my professors know what VR means. Like, is that a vehicle? Is that a new Honda of sorts? Yeah, no, I haven't seen it. Now I'm curious, Chris, like, so this is why I'm interested in this topic, because this is kind of like a hot topic. I feel like people talk about VR, but I my criticism of what we do in education sometimes is we talk about VR and then we never really go beyond like the concept of like, oh, it'd be cool to use, like, and then never really talk about it. Like, have you given thought to like how you could see some of people like actually like even like a practical example of where you think you could see VR like being helpful in the classroom, kind of changing the way that we teach. Because to your point, like laptops and iPads were in the classroom for a long time, and now I'm hard pressed not to see people using them. Like they've become a core part of what we do,
like the pencil,
even if
Right.
even if professors don't want to admit it.
No, only handwritten notes.
Oh gosh.
Smoke signals personally is my favorite.
Yes.
Anyway.
Josh and I had a professor. We had to sign a little contract.
You had like a
if
little
we wanted to
contract
use
waiver to use
laptop.
our laptop. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I
Wow,
remember
that's
those
intense.
days.
Yeah, it's funny, the kind of like the wide gamut that you'll find. Like there's people that are totally against tech, and there's people that totally want to dive into the deep end of what's possible.
Yeah. Did you have any teachers? Like I can imagine, okay, if you took, I don't know, but if you took a pottery class, like no tech in pottery, but like, did you have any that were pretty still adamant, like less tech or don't use your own laptop during class, that kind of thing?
Oh yeah, especially my freshman year. The freshman year in our college, at least in my art college, most art colleges follow this format. It's known as the foundation year. So you'll take general like drawing 1, drawing 2, design 1, design 2, and a lot of the projects that I had in those classes, we had to use traditional media, whether we wanted to or not. And while I personally like traditional media, I like, breaking out a pencil or some charcoal every once in a while. It's definitely a more traditional way of teaching art.
And therefore more likely traditional approach instructors.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. When the pandemic hit, for instance, like it was amazing. You had a ballroom dancing teacher come to you, to me or to Josh. You had a scuba diving instructor. I don't know. I don't think we ever helped in person.
I have not found a more interesting one than the scuba diver instructor.
I don't think that class happened. Even if he said it happened, I don't think it happened. But like I was already working with a drawing faculty member before the pandemic, and when that happened, like the idea that you would pivot, and he's like, how am I going to do critiques? If I want to like look over their shoulder while they're painting or while they're doing their stroke or while they're doing sighting, like how am I going to be able to tell them to do it better? I'm like, we're going to have to figure that out, but it's not impossible. Thinking about VR and some of the practical things of its use in education, like I know medical science, medical education really wants stuff like this. Like you can't, we don't do that thing anymore where we take a vagabond off the street, kill him and dissect him in front of people. Like you just don't do that. That's an 1800s thing.
We do that in VR now. Now we find a vagabond on a VR street.
The VR experience.
And then we open him up.
It specifically has to have the part where you walk outside, grab them off the street and drag them into the,
you still need to feel that pain,
ridiculous. I'm so sorry I came up with that example. That's the example.
And so here's what I'm curious about, Chris, like getting off of our digression a little bit. You're a person who knows a lot more about what's possible in VR than we do, for instance. And so I will say, I think my criticism of the way we deal with this in education is, to your point, Will, and I'm exactly the same person who does this, so this is not a criticism. Whenever we talk about VR, it goes to that. Like we talk about VR and we're like, well, medical people use it to like cut things open. And then I don't know of a lot of conversations that go beyond that. And in at least in my circle, like we get into those areas. So I'm curious, like from your involvement in VR, how do you see like where you've seen possible in VR being able to, do like what would be your, if you could dream up something, what would be like your perfect way to like be like, you guys should be using VR like this? And if it's a medical thing, just run with it and pretend I didn't say anything.
Yeah, that's funny. One of like the like the first example that I have in my notes is this medical VR experience that I tried. That
well, it just makes sense, like
yes, it does. Yeah,
you want to see inside the body. You can't just cut every body open. But I guess like I do wonder, right? Like how would VR impact the literature class that's trying to deal with like literature from the 1400s? To me, I'm like, maybe we could recreate some things that people could like talk to the people that wrote the literature in that time, or but there's a lot to that, I think.
Yeah. not to sound like the most corny tech person that
Do
has
it.
ever existed, but
Do it.
anything is possible in VR. No, but seriously, whether it's something as simple as well, I say simple now, but the medical example, or going to, let's take the literature course example. Say you're studying, I don't know, Shakespeare, and you're learning about, I don't know, what's a Shakespeare play, Romeo and Juliet.
Yes. Well done.
Solid. Nice one.
So, like, let's say instead of reading the text that Shakespeare wrote, you could be inside a virtually constructed scene from the play, and you would look around and see various parts of the play happening. You become, instead of a reader of this medium, you become part of the medium itself, and part of the story. So, and then taking that one step further, you can add a level of interaction to it. So there's virtual reality, let's say virtual reality videos or animations that you can watch, and then you can add a second level where you can interact with the world. So in the Shakespeare example, maybe you could, I don't know, point at the door that Romeo walks through, and he comes through the door and you hear the lines from the play that happen at that moment. That's a bad example, but
but you could have that be the trigger. Like you could, you might just sit in the room and nothing happening until you point at the door, do something with the door, and then it could continue. Like that would be what that interactivity would be, right?
Right. And it makes you feel a lot more connected to the story and a lot more connected to what you're supposed to be learning about, right? Because it feels like you have influence over it. You as a user, it's like when people say you learn stuff better when you're on the job, or you learn stuff better when you're immersed in the experience.
Right.
That's what VR is doing, but a digital version of that.
Yeah.
Well, and so thinking through, I guess why medical does happen, why we think about that, why it comes to mind is like they have money. They are able to create that stuff. They know that there's value in it. The hospitals have money, or the government puts stuff into it, or hey, could be military R&D, who knows? But this ends up being the issue for VR in education. What philosophy professor has cash to create an Occam's razor experience where people have to make a choice on something? So maybe the question or the opportunity in education is to get some sort of, I don't know, Avengers of virtual reality together. We just need a whole bunch of animators to get together and make as much content out there as possible, so that people could begin to use it for education. I think it's almost like it needs to be so specific that it would work for the course. But if somebody just animated the entire play of Shakespeare, the entire Romeo and Juliet play, then any teacher teaching Romeo and Juliet could use that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's kind of the issue in my mind with VR and getting it into the classroom, is we just need more virtual reality. We need more simulations.
Yeah, right now there's not enough people making content for it. There's not enough resources.
Right.
We find that even in our industry, it's like the VR FEC, out of home entertainment industry that we work in at Major Mega. VR being such a new place, it's not something that has the funding and backing that traditional types of media have.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so, that's kind of a theme across the board is, VR just needs to become more broadly accepted and more well-known, better user interface, everything.
Yeah. Well, and that's you've come over to my house and we've played Oculus. We've played, with the home set in the house, and it's fun. It is great, but it is hundreds of dollars to get the system, and then it's video games. All three of us know video games really well. Maybe not all of our audiences, but every video game costs $60 or so. If you watch your deals and you buy the right stuff, you can get cheap ones. But it's not simple necessarily or free. It's definitely not free to get into VR. So
Yeah.
trying to find that space that will work in education, when we already have an issue trying to get it even into the home first. Like, I agree with you. Like, if we can get it into more homes, it'll probably be easier to get it into education and make it more accessible.
Yeah. And I think it'll get there, within the next 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
It'll become a more commonplace thing for people to, go home and put on their headset and go into their virtual world of choice. As dystopian and creepy as that kind of seems
last
now.
week, like what Walmart would be in the metaverse. I don't even know if it's an ad. It just didn't make whatever, but it's like, yeah, here's me shopping for wine in the metaverse. I'm like, yeah, sure, maybe, who knows?
It was like, yeah, but my first place to go would not be Walmart. That would, like, I remember I saw the same thing, and I was like, that's not. I don't want to go there in real life. Why do I want to go there in virtual reality life? I kind of feel like
that's
gotta go to a cooler place than Walmart.
If I've got the whole metaverse to choose where I want to go, why am I going to Walmart?
Like, why am I here? Yeah, no, but I think, like, back to that conversation what you're talking about. I think that's one of the biggest hurdles I see when we talk about VR is, like, to your point, Chris, like, we're right now it isn't cheap to do some of those things, and you guys don't have a lot of backing in those spaces it's not as commonplace for people working on VR as much. That's why I think we've seen more of, like, other video game methods starting to pop up in education, because it's been around longer now and had some backing to come up with stuff. And, Minecraft was born, so everybody found Minecraft. But I do think, to your point, that's kind of a next step that would be powerful to see in education, because you hear people talk about this all the time, and it's a criticism we have sometimes of just in the classroom space, that, like, you can only learn so much in that space until you need to actually get into reality of what you're doing. And there's so much power to, like, mock things and experience to what you're being able to do. Cause so, like, I think even in, like, we've talked about this, like, imagine doing, like, mock counseling session in a VR experience where you're actually, like, walking into a case study for real life, like walking into a simulated house. Like, how cool would that be, where you're actually able to make choices about things and different results happen? Like, we have ways of doing this through, like, fun little quizzes and things, but it's not the same. It's like
if you could actually sit there and see somebody and do it,
like, see somebody in there, that would be really interesting. Or the other thing I was thinking about what you guys were talking about is, like, imagine also, like, a history class in the midst of this. Like, it's one thing to talk about Roman history or World War II. It's another thing to literally
that tank class.
Yeah, like tank class. Yeah, that needs to happen. Like, tanks 101. It's one thing to talk about tanks. It's another thing to literally see a virtual reality tank driving by you while shooting at people. Like, it's and there's but do you get to the point? Like, this is why I shouldn't be the sole person designing things. Well, like, back to the Roman history example, like, how cool would it be to literally walk through a simulation of what Rome looked like in its heyday while you're talking about Rome? That takes a different story than when you're just looking at a picture of some ruins that we found. Like, it's just different. It gives more, it gets more immersive and gets you into the reality of what history is, for example, and could make it more exciting for students to actually be able to see it and walk through it. So
that's one of my big things with VR is, like, if you hand someone a 500, 1,000 page textbook or whatever, they're not generally going to be excited. Like, it's just not something that's visually attractive. It doesn't get you going. But, if you tell them that they're going back into the Civil War and watching a battle in front of them, like, that'll change the way that a student approaches education, right? Like, they would be a lot more interested in subject matter if it's presented to them in a action-packed, exciting way.
I have 160 hours and counting in Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Right, I have played every Assassin's Creed game to date, besides, like, a couple of the side-scrolling weird ones. But, like, that's how much I play the Assassin's Creed game. And it made me think just a moment ago about this game, because with Odyssey, I think or Origins.
yeah,
I
this
think it
is a
was
good point.
Odyssey. They released an educational mode to the
Yeah,
game, right? The
they did.
game is go in and assassinate people. Well, that's not really awesome for 8-year-olds. but
Speak for yourself. No, I'm just
but
joking.
they okay. but they recreated the Roman Forum and the Colosseum and like so
Yeah.
many real life assets that you can walk around, right? And so they turned an educational mode on where there's no fighting, there's no blood, there's no sexual content, right? And you can just walk around. And there's like different informational points. It's the idea of augmented reality, but in a video game. Now we just need to take that version and put it in somebody's Oculus. You know what I mean? Where you could actually walk around to all these places and interact with it. Like we are on the cusp of some of this content, making the Civil War a video game, for instance.
Yeah. We're like, the resources are there to make this stuff possible. And the best thing about virtual reality is that, like, you can put people in situations like the past, the future. You can make them tiny, you can make them giant.
Oh,
Let's
yeah.
say
Ooh.
you're teaching a astronomy class. Instead of handing them a astronomy textbook and showing them the orbits of the planet, you can like make them the sun. And then you can watch the planets like circle around you, and then
Ugh.
let's say you could like reach out to a planet and then learn about it.
Oh my gosh. See, and this is where like I love the idea of thinking it through and hoping for the stuff and imagining it. Like I had a faculty member come to me. He was teaching the prisons system. All right. So criminal justice, he's teaching about prisons. And he starts talking to me about this idea for an assignment where he wants the students to be able to, pick their warden and pick the physical structures of where the buildings are and where the inmates are, where the mess hall is. And he's like, I have so much I want them to understand about how a prison works that I want them to go through an assignment of making this. And I tell you, word for word, checkbox for checkbox of the things he wanted to accomplish, there's a darned game called Prison Architect that lets you do this. And I took the information. I went to Google after our meeting. I found the game and I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. We won't, like his assignment will be play this video game, right? That's what I'm thinking in my head. And I come back to him with, I was like, dude, so you want this, right? This. I was like, I gave him his list back. I was like, this video game has all of it. And as soon as I said video game, he checked out. And that was the moment. That's what we're up against. That's what we've got to do in the next 10 to 20 years is at that moment where someone, goes like, all right, so I want the kids to learn about Romeo and Juliet. I want them to have choices. I want them to maybe like have a feel for what it was actually like in the experience. Like, okay, so VR, we need at that moment them to not go, no, it's not possible. That's where we need to start making the inroads, is like changing hearts on that.
Now, so that leads me to a question I had for you, Chris. Like so obviously one of the issues that now I've seen it change a bunch in the fact that VR has come out a little bit more, but like where's the device stuff for VR going? Like because I think that's one of the big points. Will and I imagine this from an integration side with faculty, and we know that I struggle enough to have them like sometimes open a browser. So the idea of the tech right now with the way it goes with VR like terrifies me. Trying to get a faculty member to look at it and be like, this is so all you need is this thing you put on your head and then you do this thing and you gotta. So I'm just curious, like where do you see the tech going? Because you talked a little bit at the beginning when we were kind of prepping for the episode that it is moving. Like there's stuff moving in a direction to make it more accessible and more easily usable for people.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like the tech is slowly evolving to become almost like as easy to use as, let's say, your phone or any other piece of equipment that's part of your day-to-day. VR headsets kind of started off, or maybe not started off, but for a long time were, well, for one, they required a wire, so you had to be physically connected.
Right.
So that's one issue to something that you're supposed to be able to, is supposed to be immersive and
here's
reality.
A leash on your immersion.
Yeah, suddenly you can't turn around or your computer will fall over.
So it's only immersive if you can look straight. Just look straight and don't move.
Yeah. And then another barrier to entry was the room setup that used to be required, and is still required by many headsets. VR headsets require what are known as base stations. So it's like these black boxes that you hang in your room. You might be able to see one on my camera, but they're these little black boxes that tell the headset where in 3D space you are.
Okay.
So it
yeah.
can
It
track your
sets the
position
boundary.
and yeah, it can set your rotation and position. But as of recently, headsets have been transitioning to what's known as in-headset tracking. So the headsets will have cameras inside of them that use technology to basically scan your 3D environment and are able to tell the software what your position and rotation and everything is based off of those cameras information. Yeah, so that
sounds like a
has
lot of
been
computing
huge,
power in that little thing.
yeah, it's a lot. It's impressive. I'm always blown away. I have a Quest 2. That's the headset that I'm most familiar with, and of course there's other inside out tracking headsets, but I'm just blown away every time I put that on and do the setup for it. It's so quick and easy and intuitive. Like, I have people in my life that are not at all tech
Right.
related, and they just got the hang of virtual reality so quick with the headset. It made me so excited to see something that used to be only accessible to people that were advanced in the field is now becoming like a mainstream thing.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
I think that we probably are like, just our experiences are pretty similar. Our age point, the things that we're interested in, video games, art, etc. Like I think that we're probably pretty well in sync amongst us.
Oh, we did it.
But
There it is.
there's an opportunity
Mhm.
to sketch a future here together.
I knew it was coming.
Oh, it's a patented will transition, And then
All
I
we have to do is look at the
destroy
clock.
it.
Like, has it been a while? All right, time for a transition.
It's time for the transition. I still want a button. We need to get a button at some point.
We'll have to figure that out, man. Someday when we get a sponsor. Good joke. So, all right, we've pontificated. We've got the idea of VR and that kind of art space and that tech behind us. We brought Chris on this week to kind of give us something that would be maybe more art specific or that came out of his experience. And he provided this awesome sounding tool. I wish I had a reason to use it, frankly. It's called Sync Sketch. And it allows you to do like collaborative review. It's a collaborative or feedback process on like digital media, which is digital things, as we've learned.
Mm-hmm.
What's your, in a nutshell description of Sync Sketch?
Yeah. So Sync Sketch to me is like the best. It's what any animator could possibly ask for in terms of a analysis and critique tool. So it's a platform that you can upload any piece of media really and do real-time collaboration and feedback on it. So let's say you upload a piece of video or animation, and let's say your animation professor could go in and give you notes on specific parts of that animation. They can go in and literally look at every single frame of the animation and give you feedback on that frame.
Wow.
And it saves their feedback per frame.
Sure. So instead of like we kind of mentioned before with some of the traditional folks, where you might have to have had to do that kind of critique face to face, like you can now do it virtually, but you also get it frame by frame, second by second. Everything's just documented. You can just like play, pause, go back and forth. It's just all there for you in line.
Right. Yeah. My first experience using the tool was in a course that we called digital analysis. Yet another very
analyze digital things.
Yeah, exactly. But the course was all about dissecting existing media, like animation and games, that just stuff that we enjoyed.
Okay.
So we could upload like animations, like let's say a Pixar film, a clip from a Pixar film that we like. We could upload that piece of media to SyncSketch and then draw over frames of the animation to learn what the animators did.
Oh wow.
And like truly understand and relate it to the fundamentals of animation that we were learning in class.
So if we see the scene where Buzz Lightyear is riding on the car in the track in Toy Story 1 and it launches him across the bedroom and he's trying to fly out of Andy's room or whatever, like you could put that whole scene in there and everything from just anything. Just mark up the lighting, you could mark up this, you know, how they use gravity or like physics, and like just it's a full sandbox for you guys to do feedback and workshop that entire experience.
Yeah, exactly. You can fully dissect it. And they've been actually doing a really cool job of upgrading the tools. You mentioned the lighting of that scene. They've actually been working on adding like brushes that can like simulate lighting, like basically taking digital painting tools and adding it to SyncSketch so that it's even more intuitive. It used to
Wow.
be just like a whiteboard where you could make notes
Black
over any
color,
frame.
white color, just like very
Yeah.
scribbly stuff.
Mm-hmm. But now they're trying to make it so that you can literally draw like into the frame and like make edits to the piece as
Wow.
feedback. It's as
Wow.
if, you know, you're in a real drawing studio and your teacher takes your pencil and, you know, shades in a certain part of the image.
Wow. And all of this virtually. Easy to do.
Exactly. Yeah. From what I understand, they have been really, they've seen a lot of growth during COVID times because, you know, they had people using it before, but now that like a lot of studios have gone remote and a lot of feedback has to be done out of, you know, not in person, it's kind of blown up in the animation industry and animation education space.
That's awesome. I see on my side that it lets you put in, you know, of course, MP4s and 3D models, but like 360 images, PDFs. There's a whiteboard feature, just single pictures. So, you know, it definitely sounds, and you have the experience of using it for like animation and like awesome legit stuff. But I think I could I could probably use it, you know, with a whiteboard or, you know, a
Find some
PDF or
ways.
something. It feels like a
Leverage it.
waste of it to like use it on a PDF, but you could.
What do you mean? It's, you know, built for crazy animation. They obviously were imagining that people would also bring PDFs in as a tool usage.
Mark up a legal document.
Yeah, they were like, yeah, people definitely do that. Yeah, no, I mean, we have like communications courses and stuff where they also have to like do video editing and comment on that type of stuff. Like, I could definitely see a use in here, especially because of just the cool way that you can break up frames. Because that's what I'm seeing right now. So like, Will and I both have a demo version of this up on ours. I think we were talking about this before we started the episode, and I have very interesting things that they've added to my demo, which are like a robot singing in rain and some type of Agent 37 thing. I don't know. And a very depressing 3D 360 video of what looks like my worst nightmare of a building that I would die in. Do you have that too? Okay.
Yeah.
But I really like that. Like, it's breaking up the different videos and information by frames. But then, like, so I tested leaving like comments and stuff in it. And I love that it's showing me how many comments are left on certain things and like where in the time frame they are. And like, to your point, Chris, I'm seeing some of the brush tools and stuff. It's really cool. You can literally like play the video out, pause it, do some editing, drawing in a section, and literally then just keep moving on and interact with each other. So I think it's a really cool tool, very powerful. It keeps reminding me that I don't have access to the brush tools officially, but.
Yeah,
and
that must be a
we're just playing with this, you know, one-off ourselves. Could you have put a whole class in this? You know what I mean? Like, everybody could work on the same video, or like your project could go on screen and everybody could annotate it, or
yeah, you can, as long as you have the URL to that specific
perfect
what they call a sketch, then
Okay.
you can sync up on the sketch and interact real time.
Good
Hence the
name
name.
usage there. Did you, out of curiosity, did you guys use this at all on your kind of like final thesis class that you were working on? Okay.
Yeah, we would just upload various versions of our senior film, and our professors could go in and make notes on specific parts of the film, on specific pieces of animation, on shot composition, everything that goes into a film. They could go to a single part of the thing. You wouldn't have to have that weird conversation of that animation, or the animation that was like 37 seconds in on that one side of the picture. No, you could, that's a big challenge with critiquing
Right.
animated films, is they're like long and there's a lot going on. So having a tool like this to like really break it down, it was so helpful.
That's awesome.
That's cool.
Josh, I think you pulled up some pricing stuff. So one of the things that we love at High Tech is free, but we also love a good product. So while this one's not free, it's not too bad, right?
Entirely. Yeah, they have like a light version that is free for everyone. That's the plan that like we're on right now, messing around.
Okay.
It looks like you have like very basic kind of real-time collaboration commenting. Like we could do commenting and stuff if we wanted to. Unlimited reviewers, stuff like that. Ironically, one of their things does have PDF annotation summary, Will, so there you go.
Like I said.
Other thing, just this is not for pricing, but just a plus, they have actual app mentioning tools in the comment stuff, so that's a plus. Cool. I give a win to that, because if I had $1 for every education tool that didn't use app mentioning tools in their comments that made me sad, I'd be a lot richer. So anyway, that's cool. But yeah, so then from there they just have a bunch of different kind of plans from there. But I think the most important thing for us is they do have a plan for education. So basically you can get a 14-day trial to use it. So I'd encourage, like, if you're interested in this app, if you're listening, try the trial just to kind of get a feel for what it does. I think those are always my recommendations when you're checking out apps. Use the trial, man. Like take use of it and try it out. But then from there, it looks like it's $2 per student per month, which is not bad for a tool like this. I think the thing I would highlight for a tool like this, in very much why it's coming out of your background, Chris, is while yes, I could find other uses for this in other spaces, it's a focus tool. It's like some of the other tools we've done where like it has a group that it's getting to. But if you're working in an art or media platform, like, this tool is cool. It does a lot of stuff that like I would have to leverage several tools to make happen without using this. And that's how I usually know it's a pretty solid tool. If I know that I have to pull together 6 other tools to replace it, it's a solid tool. Yeah. So pricing's not bad.
Well, I think this is a pretty solid tool, pretty solid opportunity. You've used it as a student. That's great. But is there anything that you would say is like your pro tip if you were going to try and take on Sync Sketch? Sync Sketch?
Sync Sketch.
It is a little bit of a tongue twister. No, I would say just, try uploading anything into it, a YouTube video that you find fun, image. If you are into the 3D modeling space, upload a 3D model and see what you can do with that. That's one of the features that I'm personally most excited about, because they added it after I used it as a student.
For the thing you wanted to use it for.
Yeah, exactly. So just to nerd out for a second, whereas I used to have to like render out an animation, let's say I was doing a 3D animation and want to critique, we would have to render out a 2D video of that animation. But now you can upload the 3D model itself and have the 3D model animation play out, and you can make notes on the 3D model. So you can watch the animation from any angle, at any speed.
Wow.
It's really, really impressive as, someone that's in the space, and this is like an animator's dream.
That's cool. Yeah, this is definitely the moment, people listening to the podcast, where we hit the point with the person that we're interviewing and talking to, that we're like, oh yeah, he definitely knows much more about this topic than Will and I do. This is where you're do this
pro,
and this, and you can see it in both Will and I's face, where we're like, I don't actually really know what that means, but I think this is good.
It is very good. And we trust you.
I just have so much admiration for this tool because you can tell it's made by people that
Do it.
that do it. Like the CEO, he was at Pixar for a while and worked as I think it was the creative director. I might be getting this wrong, but the creative director at Facebook.
Okay.
And from what I understand, he basically built the tool because he wanted something that could improve the feedback and education, the loop that was in the animation industry.
Yeah.
From create to feedback to create again to recreate. Like you gotta tighten that timeline up. Otherwise you do have people walking from office to office. Here, what do you think of this now that I've done this 10 minutes of work? Go back to the desk. Like now you can just send a link. Hey, I just changed something. What do you think? Hey, I just changed something. What do you think? You know what I mean? Like it becomes that 21st century work experience of instant feedback and repeat.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Yeah. This has been fantastic. We are not done with Chris. I know that we've got more in the future just because of the art experience, but even as we were trying to come up with the ideas for this episode, we had like 6 others. So we know you'll be back. Thank you so much for taking the time with us. We know that we'll be sharing some things out like your Insta and whatever, anything you're willing to let us share. We'll make sure that those go out with this episode, but we will wrap here in just a second with me and Josh as we debrief on the episode. What a great conversation. You know, I really appreciate the idea of high-tech podcast. This is something that Josh and I kind of brought together because we love talking about this, but now we're finding even, I would say, I'm not saying this in a negative way, like even random people in our lives, right? Chris is not an educator primarily.
Yeah.
Chris is not an ed tech. Chris is, but he can still kind of come in, participate in the conversation because once you've been through some sort of education, you know how you want it to be better. And like, he's such a future thinker. He works every day. His job is to build things that weren't possible 20 years ago, 25 years ago, 30, maybe even 10. I don't know how new, if you will, VR is, but he creates stuff that wasn't previously possible. And I just find that amazing.
Yeah, he has clearly like thoughts about what it looks like in the future, and like to your point, like I think with Chris especially this episode, it's like we're starting to realize we have just like random people in our lives who listen to this podcast who aren't primarily educators but are interested in education because they went through it, they know how it could be better, they have thoughts on it. Education is not just for the educator, it's a
it's all of our problem in one sense. Like that's something that I think, and I just think that Chris cares, even though it's not his everyday thing, he's willing to think about it and take time to do it. And I'm so thankful that he took the time with us to give us some of the thoughts on a subject that you and I know nothing about besides playing video games.
I've like only played VR video games, I got nothing. And Chris knows much more about where that world is going,
right?
Which I think is important. I think ultimately is what came out in the episode. Like it's interesting, some of these series we're doing or some of these episodes we're doing with people, like they're planned to a certain extent, but like we, like it's basically like here's a general thing we want to talk about and we'll talk about it. And with Chris, it was kind of like I think the original intention in this episode was that we talk a little bit about like his learning experience as a student in the art, which we did. Right. And then kind of get into like VR, future of VR and education. But it really went down this train of like how to make VR more accessible in education.
Right,
like because here's the reality. Like we love to talk about VR in education, but we don't love to talk about that like basically only the largest institutions possible can do VR in education right now.
Yeah.
Like it's not something that is accessible as the laptop. Like I can't sit here and pretend like all of you are going to listen to this episode, go off and do VR because it's not something you could just buy.
What I would hope to like to say to liken it to is the laptop, right? Like for the longest time in the 90s, the early 2000s, it was expensive to have a laptop. You just couldn't. And then it became easier and easier, cheaper and cheaper for people to have laptops. And so now faculty were pressed with the matter of like, before students just didn't have them. I didn't have to address the matter. I didn't have to try to make them a part of my classroom or keep them out of my classroom. Now that everybody's got one, people have to make the decision, well, do I bring it into the classroom or do I keep it out of the classroom? How do I use it in the classroom? And I'm hoping, just like I think Chris's sentiment in the episode was, if we can get the price point on these things down, everyone could be making the decision, well, should I use VR in my class or not? That, right now that's not a question. It's not cheap enough for that to be even the consideration, but it could be.
But I think we have to start looking for ways to use it to get it to that point. Like we live in a very simple world of demand. Like if it's not in demand, nobody's going to do it.
Right.
And I think VR is getting there to a certain extent with people. I just think, I thought the conversation was interesting. I hadn't really thought about what was holding us back from doing it, but also at the same time, I really think like, for those of you who are maybe like me at times, who are skeptical of like the VR conversation, I'll be honest, I'm at times skeptical of the VR. I'm a technologist, and I still am skeptical of the VR conversation sometimes, because I'm kind of like, okay, I get it. It's new. We want to use it. But to Chris's point, like, it's a thing that could take you places that you couldn't have gone before.
Yeah.
And I think that opens doors in education. Like, it opens doors for more creativity. It opens doors to get students more engaged, to make things more real for them. I mean, the examples we were talking about using it in a history class, or using it in the medical field, even though I busted on that, and I'm sorry, Chris.
Or the tank class.
Seriously, like, we joke about this stuff, but that stuff brings things to life that you could never do. You can't take people to Rome during its heyday right now.
Right.
Why? Because it's gone.
Yeah.
But you could in a VR setup that's designed to do that. And so anyway, I just think that kind of encouraged me and should excite us to try to see this happen more in education, find ways to pull it in and like get it used.
You're right about like the ancient Rome, and I agree. Like, yes, but like, Josh, have you ever been in a tank? I've never been in a tank. I've
never been in a tank.
I've seen them parked at parks and stuff, and I've walked around them once, but I've never even like physically been allowed to walk up and get in one, right? Like, and I don't know if there's even a chance for me to. I don't know where, but maybe somebody who could do that kind of exploration could give somebody a real love for the fact that tanks are engineering marvels. And they're an engineer, and they might want to work on them, and they didn't know that they wanted to work on them. That could be a great thing.
I love that we keep coming back to this. It's all
about
class.
tanks, man.
Tanks 101. It's a thing, and somebody started. But no, seriously, like, you could use that to get them excited about things. I mean, we talked about in the episode, like, using VR. Imagine being able to do like you're doing a counseling session and you need to do like a mock. We keep coming back to social work in some areas. I think it's because of our interaction with social workers. Having to do a case that they have to go out on. It's one thing to talk about it, or even read a written out case, or take a fake quiz that walks you through a scenario like we've talked about. And all those things are great. But like, imagine the day of being able to have VR where you literally
do it.
Are experiencing getting out and going into a situation. And sure, students are going to know it's not real, but it's that extra level of experience.
I know my video games aren't real, and I love doing them.
Yeah. So I think it's just that extra level. And so I don't know. I'm excited about where VR could go with it. And I'm excited. I think we should be encouraged, those of us in education, talking to Chris, because it's clear the VR people are looking into how we make this cheaper and more accessible to people. It's going to happen at some point, because VR people like Chris won't have jobs if they can't make it more accessible to people. So like, and people can say, well, I don't see the day of that happening. Yeah, but we also didn't see the day of when I'm playing video games on my cell phone.
Right.
With more power than what it took to get to the moon. So like, it's not the same equivalency, but it's I don't think it's that far off. I think you're seeing that area grow. And when it does, I think those of us in education should be looking for ways that we can transform the way we do what we do through that tool, because it's a very powerful tool, and I think could be very useful to us in learning experience. So that's my 10 cents.
I love it. Thank you.
On that note, another week of the High Tech Podcast, folks. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us with Chris. I'm sure you'll hear from him again. It's not going to be the last time we see Chris on the High Tech Podcast.
He'll be back.
He'll be back. So with that said, thank you for joining us on another week, the High Tech Podcast, where we look at how we can harness that technology, whether virtual or in the physical classroom.
And if you tune in for episode 45, we will be talking about
Wow, this is a total failure of an ending.
Whether or not we should use portfolios, and specifically the app Milanote. Josh and I are new here, folks, okay? The new season, new process. We'll figure it out eventually. Until that episode, we'll see you.
See ya.